Good afternoon. Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in beautiful Glen Cove, New York. This online program, as many of you know, is part of a regular series that we launched when our building was closed due to the corona crisis as a way to share information about particular objects in our collection at a time when the building was closed. I am happy to say that our building has reopened. People can come in and see these objects and images in person, but we continue to do the Curator's Corner program online because of continuing concerns that exist. I just found out I'm going to get my first vaccine, hopefully this coming weekend. So I hope all of you are also out there getting vaccinated. One more comment, as I always like to remind people, if you've got questions during my program, please use the Q&A feature and type in your questions there, and I will either respond during my talk or when I'm done. Okay, today, as part of HMTC's effort to recognize Black History Month, I want to focus on this photograph, which we have on display in our 5th gallery. Here is the caption that we include in the gallery. In April of 1945, an American soldier with the 7th Army was photographed after capturing a group of German soldiers in a forest. I'll be honest, I wanted to explore this photo and I hadn't dug into it much when I put it on our calendar because I wanted to learn more about it, but the more I dug, I really could not find a lot. So that in itself is an interesting story. I mean, I have plenty to share with you, but I was surprised how little information there is about this. I think there are a significant number of points to make, and I hope to make them, but the details about this particular photo are pretty slim. Let me start with what we do know. The original picture is credited to the Associated Press in its archives. And the caption in the Associated Press archive says, an American soldier of the 12th Armored Division stands guard over a group of German soldiers captured in April of 1945 in a forest at an unknown location in Germany. So a little different than ours. You may notice some of those differences. First, the AP caption says the soldiers in the 12th Army, so 12th Armored Division, and we say he's in the 7th Army. This is really not a difference with any meaning, as the 12th Armored Division was part of the 7th Army. A second difference is that we just say that the photograph was taken in a forest, while the AP says a forest at an unknown location in Germany. Again, I'd say probably not much to that difference. A third difference, though, I think is more meaningful. Our caption says that the soldier was photographed after capturing a group of German soldiers, while the AP version says the soldier is standing guard over a group of captured German soldiers. Those could be read to mean the same thing, but the official AP caption is less clear about the soldiers' active involvement in capturing the Germans. Let me come back to this issue because I think it hints at some of the larger issues that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Anyway, so that is the caption from the Associated Press. They also, in their archives, have a few other pieces of information about the photograph, including that it's officially dated April 1st, 1945, so not just April, a minor change. And second, while the photo credit goes to the Associated Press, the source of the photograph is listed as the Office of War Information. If the source was the Associated Press, then it would be likely that the photograph had been taken by a newspaper photographer or by an AP photographer who was traveling with the 12th Armored Division. But instead, the source is the Office of War Information, the WWII, which was a somewhat controversial government office that was established by FDR in June of 1942. The Office of War Information's purpose was to centralize the many information services of the United States government and create a single line of communication about the war to the American public. So the OWI created and distributed posters, booklets, photographs, radio shows, films, all of those things. What was controversial about these efforts is they were designed to improve morale, boost patriotic support for the war, encourage people to participate in the war effort. Equally important, the OWI was designed to control the information that Americans received about the war. the Office of War Information created a propaganda machine in America that controlled all war-related information given to the public. Images and news reports were censored, while government-approved ideas were included in films, radio, and advertisements. Anything that negatively impacted the war effort or damaged morale was removed from public consumption. These same systems and tools were being used at the exact same time in Germany by the Reich Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, to sustain the Nazi Party's power and to rally Germans to murder millions of Jews. I should be clear, however, that the OWI, which was under the direction of a civilian journalist named Elmer Davis, was not the same as the Reich's Ministry of Propaganda. They were both based on the idea that the government could foster public support through the control of information, but the Nazis used the system at a different level, and the end goal included genocide, something that was never part of the American idea. At the OWI, photographers were initially sent across the United States to document Americans doing patriotic work. They photographed workers at factories and on farms, children gathering scraps for the war effort, men and women in uniform, everyone doing their bit for the war effort. Rosie the Riveter, the famous poster here, one of the Office of War Information's inventions to promote the work by women working on the home front. Here's another poster that the Office of War Information came out with to promote the saving of scraps and recycling for the war effort. But the OWI also promoted positive images of African Americans with pictures like this of an African American worker in the Richmond shipyards to encourage everyone to join the effort to help. And all of these efforts were developed out of a recognition that there was some need to push these viewpoints. There were fears, for example, that women would not be willing to do physically hard labor and get their hands dirty for the war effort because of gender norms that had existed for generations that celebrated a woman's place as in the home. There were also fears that people would waste material and goods that would be needed in the war because of commercialism that had been promoting in the 1920s a celebration of consumption rather than of saving. And there were reasons to fear African Americans would not help with the war effort. Throughout much of the country, African Americans faced segregation and discrimination and were relegated to a second-class status. This was the era that was known as Jim Crow, the name of the racial caste system, which operated primarily, but not exclusively, in southern states from the end of Reconstruction in 1877 all the way to the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. Jim Crow was more than just a series of rigid anti-Black laws. It was a way of life that separated Blacks and whites and projected a normalized view that African Americans were second-class citizens. Before I go on, I want to warn you that I'm going to show a pretty graphic image in a few moments, but I think it highlights, importantly, the racist attitudes in much of America. On the milder side, there were signs like this, in this case from a bus station in Rome, Georgia in 1943, which were seen throughout the South. Here's an example from Anniston, Alabama, where African Americans were relegated to a side entrance at the movie theater, which led to an upstairs balcony so that whites only could have the main floor of seating. Here's another example from Oklahoma City in 1939 showing a segregated water cooler. And here, an example from a cafe in Durham, North Carolina, where there were separate entrances for white and Black patrons. But it was not only separate and unequal facilities. African Americans were also the target of intimidation, violence, and murder. More than 100 African Americans were lynched between 1930 and 1938, grabbed by a mob of whites and hanged with no trial or due process. This is a photograph of the lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith in Marion, Indiana, after a 23-year-old white man was shot and killed and his 19-year-old fiancée claimed that she had been raped, although she later recanted. A crowd of some 10,000 people came to watch the lynching. The iconic photograph of the incident inspired Mabel Meeropol to write the poem and song Strange Fruit, which Billie Holiday recorded in 1930, 2 years before America's entry into World War II. You can see the lyrics. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. In the North, there were not the same whites-only signs, but racial covenants restricted where African Americans could live and created highly segregated school systems, even without the legal restrictions imposed in the South. Regardless of the racism and segregation in America, once the war started with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, African Americans enlisted in the war effort in huge numbers. In 1941, less than 4,000 African Americans were serving in the military, and only 12 African Americans have become officers. When the draft was initiated, more than 2.5 million African Americans signed up. And by 1945, more than 1.2 million African Americans would be serving in uniform on the home front, in Europe, and in the Pacific. However, African Americans joined a military that, like much of America, was segregated. This meant that most African Americans serving in the beginning of World War II were assigned to non-combat units and relegated to service duties such as supply, maintenance, and transportation. Stephen Ambrose, the great World War II historian, identified the lamentable irony that the world's greatest democracy fought the world's greatest racist with a segregated army. That irony was something that African Americans noted well before Stephen Ambrose came around. 2 months after Pearl Harbor, the most widely read Black newspaper in America, the Pittsburgh Courier, launched a national campaign that urged Black people to give their all for the war effort, while at the same time calling on the government to do all it could to make the language of the constitutional amendments that guaranteed equality, to make them real for every citizen, regardless of race. In the search for victory overseas and at home, they called it the WWII campaign, adopting this logo that soon spread to other African American newspapers across the country. The WWII campaign had its roots in a letter to the editor written by James G. Thompson from Wichita, Kansas, that the Pittsburgh Courier published in January of 1942. Thompson wrote, as you can see, being an American of dark complexion and some 26 years, these questions flashed through my mind. Should I sacrifice my life to live half American? Will things be better for the next generation in the peace to follow? Would it be demanding too much to demand full citizenship rights in exchange for sacrificing of my life? Is the kind of America I know worth defending? Will America be true? Will America be a true and pure democracy after this war? Will colored Americans suffer still the indignities that have been heaped upon them in the past? These and other questions need answering. I think a powerful letter, and obviously sparked this whole movement. The legacy of the WWII campaign is hard to measure. By the end of the war, although the Pittsburgh Courier couldn't claim any concrete accomplishments, it had provided a voice to Americans who wanted to protest racial discrimination and yet contribute to the war effort. And 3 years later, on July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981, which ordered the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces, finally achieving one of the main goals of the WWII campaign that it had promoted. Truman's decision followed not only the WWII campaign, but also demonstrated achievements by African American soldiers during the war. By the final years of World War II, troop losses had virtually forced the military to begin placing more African American troops into positions as infantrymen, pilots, tankers, medics, and officers in increasing numbers. In October of 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion became the first African American tank squad to see combat during World War II. They were assigned to the hard-charging 3rd Army under the command of General George S. Patton. Patton apparently welcomed them with colorful language, much like he was known for, saying, I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Don't let them down, and damn you, don't let me down. Sounds like George Patton. By the end of the war, the Black Panthers, as they had become known, had fought their way further east than nearly every other unit from the United States, receiving 391 decorations for heroism. They fought in France and Belgium and were one of the first American battalions to meet the Russian army in Austria. And they also broke through Nazi Germany's Siegfried Line, allowing all of Patton's Third Army to enter Germany. But it wasn't just the 761st Black Panthers. As the war progressed, some military units began to integrate, including the soldier division that we have in our photograph. His 12th Armored Division was one of 10 US divisions that had integrated combat companies. 10 divisions out of the 60 or so that fought in the European theater was clearly nothing to write home about, but it was a start. And this takes me back to our photograph and the fact that its original source, was the War Information, the Office of War Information. The photograph is not an action shot where the soldiers are kind of caught in the middle of fighting. On the other hand, it doesn't seem to be a really fully staged photograph given the presence of the German soldiers. I'd say it's I'd say it's somewhere in the between. Both the American and German soldiers seem well aware of the camera and are looking over towards it. The photograph looks like it was taken on purpose, not just randomly snapped. The content, combined with the fact that it was taken by the Office of War Information, makes me think that it was likely taken to help rally support for African Americans, both in other divisions and on the home front. Now, I should emphasize that that is a supposition. The fact is we don't have more details about the photograph. I can say, however, that there are hundreds or thousands of photographs showing African American soldiers from World War II. Many of them show troops on parade or in training when it was far easier to get photographs. There are also many that show the camaraderie of the military units. Far rarer, however, are photographs like this one that show African American soldiers confronting the enemy. Again, because the segregated military largely kept African American soldiers in non-combat roles. There is another thing I wanted to share with you about this photograph. When I started preparing for our program, I did a Google search for this image, and that's something I often do to see where else the image is used or has appeared. But when I searched for this image, I found that it is okay, not sure what happened there. But what I found is that this is one of a very common image that's circulating on the web. I wanted to try and convey some of what I found. Oops, let me just pull up. I just want to make sure hope everything is still working on your end. I apologize for that little glitch. Anyway, I wanted to kind of give you a sense of what I found. I found more than 700 hits when I searched for this on online, this image. And I wanted to try and convey that in some way. I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell, but I zoomed out on my screen and then took a screenshot. Each of these little squares is a copy of the photograph we have in our museum that's displayed on some website. Again, hundreds and hundreds of these. It's a strikingly popular image. By comparison, when I did a Google search for another image in our gallery that I spoke about in a previous Curator's Corner, one that shows the public humiliation of a Jewish man and his non-Jewish girlfriend that was taken in 1933, that I found less than 600 copies on the web. It was still a lot, and that is a common image. It was one that was widely circulated when it was initially taken and since by both the pro-Nazi forces and anti-Nazi forces. And it's something that's in a number of museums. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that the image of our African-American soldier is the most well-known image from World War II. That title, oops, oh, there's the examples of what I found from that image compared to the version of the image I have that I'm talking about today. But in terms of popular images, we're probably talking something like this the Marines raising the United States flag on Mount Suribachi during the battle for Iwo Jima. My Google image search for this came up with more than 1,000 hits. But for this photograph to be used over 700 times suggests that it continues to resonate for many people, perhaps in ways that the Office of War Information couldn't have realized in 1945. One other thing that's surprising to me is, given the widespread use of this image, it's particularly surprising that we don't know the name of the soldier in it. That's not something that's available. And here I want to go back to the caption provided by the Office of War Information. Something I didn't mention before, but I do think is notable, is that the caption does not label the soldier as African American. It just says he's an American soldier. And there's a recognition of equality with that phrasing, appropriately earned by African Americans who had risked their lives in the same way as other soldiers. Like Patton had said, the color of his skin didn't matter. He was just a soldier. However, the OWI's description of this soldier as only guarding the German soldiers rather than having been actively engaged in capturing them hints back to the racist views of the time. And here I should again be clear that I'm leaning into some supposition because we have such little hard information. But I think that the prevalence of racism in America and the fact that even in 1945, after 4 years of African Americans proving their commitment to the war effort, the military still resisted integration and continued to relegate Black soldiers in most cases to menial positions. And while the OWI wanted to highlight the active service of Black soldiers, they might not have wanted to upset racist white Americans by celebrating African Americans moving into frontline duties. So by labeling this soldier as just serving as a guard, the OWI could try to walk the fine line that would rally African Americans to support the war without riling racist whites. There are clues, however, that the soldier here is more than just a guard. First, he's wearing combat fatigues that look well worn. It's not a uniform of a soldier who's relegated to the rear echelon. There's no clear sign of his insignia or rank, again, something that was much more likely among frontline fighters and those in service roles. And he has the full gear of a fighting soldier, from the bayonet and the Remington rifle to the ammunition belt and the over-the-shoulder bag that's just visible on his back. His uniform and gear suggest that he was more than just a guard. But again, that might have been seen as something many white Americans were not ready to hear in 1945. Let me finish with one final comment about African American soldiers in the European theater. As I've mentioned, by 1945, Black soldiers were serving in front lines and were among the troops that would have liberated a number of Nazi camps. We have this photograph in our gallery showing a group of 4 African American soldiers standing in front of the crematoria at Ebense, a subcamp of Mauthausen, after its liberation. One of the survivors who was liberated from Mauthausen, Sonia Weitz, later wrote a poem to describe her liberator experience. The title of the poem is Black Messiah. And as you can see, it reads, "A black GI stood by the door. I never saw a black before. He'll set me free before I die. I thought he must be the Messiah. A black Messiah came for me. He stared with eyes that didn't see. He never heard a single word which hung absurd upon my tongue. And then he simply froze in place, the shock, the horror on his face. He didn't weep, he didn't cry, but deep within his gentle eyes, a flood of devastating pain, his innocence forever slain." The poem, which I'm a fan of, is a reminder about the many roles played by African American soldiers during World War II. It certainly would be possible that the soldier shown in this photograph not only captured these German soldiers, but went on to be a liberator, like the one described by Sonia. That's, however, a supposition. We don't have his name or any more details that other than he was in the 12th Armored Division. But even that little information is a window into the much larger history of the actions of African Americans during World War II, and that's what I tried to highlight today. So I'm going to stop there. I will look if you have questions, as always, but let me first put in a plug for our upcoming programs. Tonight, 7 o'clock, we have our program with Charles Fazzino, where he's going to take us on a virtual visit through his gallery and through his studio. Should be very nice. He's going to talk about his Heroes from the Holocaust series. Then tomorrow evening at 6:30, I'm very excited with the launch of our Catskills on the Big and Small Screen series, where we'll be screening films that depict the Catskills and then hearing from our scholar in residence, Dr. Linda Burkhart, as she discusses the accuracy of the depictions, the popular image of the Catskills in public memory, and answers questions from the audience. Our first program tomorrow will include a screening from an episode of the acclaimed cable series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, when the central characters head to the Catskills for summer vacation. And I should add that you don't have to be familiar with this series or have watched many other episodes to understand this episode. It really is a self-contained story. So I hope you'll join us. And one more program to mention, next Tuesday, we'll be holding a second virtual cooking demonstration building on the success of our challah baking demonstration from last month. This time we're going to have the chef of Long Island Pekin demonstrating a Chinese classic, scallion pancakes, and talking about the Chinese immigrant experience of adjusting to America and the needs to combat anti-Chinese racism that's been a resurgence in the last couple of months. You can find details about these and all our upcoming programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org. And as always, I ask that you go to our website and also click the Give Now button. Okay, let me see if there's any questions out there. There is another soldier out there, Honey says. Let's see, I'm gonna go back to the picture. Yeah, back here, there's another soldier hidden away behind there. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Honey. Also perhaps suggesting that this was more than just guarding, that there had been some action to capture them, in my opinion. But we don't know much more about it. Okay, well, thanks very much for tuning in. Let me see. Could it be possible, Felice asks, that putting a black soldier to guard the Germans was deliberate given the Nazis' bias toward the inferior races? Absolutely, Felice. I think this could easily have been just that other kind of jab at the Nazi prisoners. I'm sure that Nazis, as they faced both Jewish soldiers and African-American soldiers, would have had to struggle with their own racist ideology of claiming to be superior. So yes, certainly could be that it was another part of that effort to just to cause trouble for the Nazis. Okay, thanks very much for participating and attending this program. I look forward to seeing you at our other programs too. Many thanks. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care.